Rev up your engines! Well, the car enthusiast says, on all-wheel drive, aren't the newer vehicles more fuel efficient? They used to be, but they're still less fuel efficient than a two-wheel drive. If you look at any of the ratings, which are often total BS, the all-wheel drive rating will always be a mile or 2 or 3 miles per gallon less than the two-wheel drive vehicles. But that's a line of hoo-ha, because I had a brand new Lexus I was road testing a few months ago. I drove it from Houston, San Antonio and back, right? And it got 8 miles a gallon less on the highway than their rating was. So that was a bunch of crap. And I drove the speed limit, which was 75 miles an hour on cruise control. I even had it on economy cruise control. And it still got a lot worse than what it was rated for. I mean, it's a lot of hoo-ha, what they say in those here's your estimated stuff. You know, the government only tests a few of them a year. Most of that is just information manufacturers give to them and they believe it. A lot of it's total hoo-ha because they're pushing them. They're high at profit margins and they want to pretend they get better gas mileage than they actually do. Andrew Pham says, I got a 2016 Honda Accord 4-cylinder, 68,000 miles. Car vibrates when I'm going to drive stoplight. Should I change the spark plugs? Burns a little oil. Well, if it burns a little oil, you want to change the spark plugs, but those things have iridium spark plugs. They're good for at least 120,000 miles. If it shakes a little, do my video. Make your car run better with a little spray cleaner. You get a can of MAF spray cleaner and throttle spray cleaner. You clean the MAF sensor, you clean the throttle, just like I show in the video, and odds are it'll stop shaking. They just get dirty and carbon up. They need to be cleaned every once in a while. They're not maintenance free. I always need a little bit of cleaning here and there. Carbon will build up on the throttle and the MAP sensor. And it's very easy to do yourself if you watch my YouTube video. Avram Kroak says, Scotty, my 95 Mustang GT sounds like a hamster wheel in the belt drive. I've replaced the idler tensioner, been through the whole belt system. Okay, you want to make sure it's coming from that. Take the belts off and run it. You can start it in the driveway and just let it sit there. If the noise goes away, then you know it's one of those things. And then start checking them all. Maybe the harmonic balancer, the main one that drives them all, is worn. If you grab it, it wobbles, you know that needs replacing. But take it off first, because I mean there's bearings inside the engine that could make noise that would do weird stuff too. So take it off, and if it doesn't make the noise, then grab every single one, spin them, and you'll find one of them has wear and wobbles and makes some kind of noise. Andy else says, sorry if I missed your answer. You generally say not to change tranny fluid on high old mileage cars. What about low mileage cars? I have a 95 Toyota with 58 original 1,000 miles that was never changed. Yeah, go ahead and change it now, especially on a Toyota. See, the Toyotas aren't like the old style American automatic transmissions, which shedded clutch material. They're automatic clutches, and a lot of the asbestos material would shed, and they make a mess in an American vehicle. The Toyota design's completely different. They don't have those problems. So yes, I would use the Toyota fluid, but I would just change it. I just drop the pan, I change the filter, and I change the fluid, and that's it. Don't flush it, just change it. Tony Video Channel says, what are your thoughts on a BMW E60 530D 2004 diesel? Not a BMW fan. In the United States, parts cost a fortune. They're in this money pits, but those are pretty good diesel engines. If it's high mileage and you got to repair a diesel engine, it costs a fortune to repair your diesel engines correctly. There's so much pressure, they're so strongly built, the parts cost a fortune, and even though it's a diesel engine, it's still a BMW. All the electronics in that are still BMW parts that cost a small fortune. But on the other hand, let's say you live in Deutschland, in Germany. Well, the parts are cheaper, guys know how to work on them, it might be a great car. Or I know guys in England who have diesel ones and they love them. People know how to work on them, plenty of diesel available. But in the United States, no, it would be a mistake to buy one because when it broke, it would cost you a fortune to get the thing repaired. Hardly anybody knows how to work on them, and the parts cost a fortune here. Mr. A. Bandit says, what are your thoughts on buying a 2009 Ford Ranger? I would get a Toyota Tacoma long before I'd buy a Ranger. But on the other hand, if you're looking at a 2009 Tacoma, you're going to pay a ton of money. You can get a 2009 Ford Ranger probably pretty cheap, and they can be decent pickup trucks. If you're talking about money versus what you get, you're always going to pay with a Toyota unless you're really lucky and somebody died or something. Join the Army, you get a cheap deal on one, which is rare because most people know the Toyotas are worth a lot of money and they're always going to sell it for a lot of money. But you can always get a Ford Ranger a lot cheaper, and they're decent trucks. They're not terrible trucks, and you can get them so much cheaper. I mean, the other day, one of my grandson's friends, he got an 81 F100 Ford with the 300 CID straight six, the one they used in dump trucks, for $2, and it runs like a clock. So, you can't get one cheap enough, it can still be a good vehicle. Super Sweet Family says, hey, I got oil in my radiator on a BMW 530i. Let's pray it's just your radiator. If the coolant part of the radiator is broken, then you can get transmission fluid into the radiator, and then there'll be oil in your radiator. But if it's engine oil and not transmission oil, that would mean that the head gasket's blowing and the engine oil part are going through the head gasket into the coolant part of the engine, getting in the radiator, and you're going to have to rebuild the engine. And doing that on a BMW is big time money. You're not going to like the price of that. James Self says, Scotty, what causes my F-150 to flicker the lights while I'm running? Well, first thing you do when you got flickering lights is check your battery terminals. They could be loose. They need tightening. Simple fix, right? Then, if that's not the case, have your battery load tested. All auto parts stores do it. Free a weak battery can do that if it's really bad. And if it's not that, have the alternator load tested. And if that's weak, that can make it flicker too. Now, if it's not that, it means the ground system for the headlights is going bad. Headlights need power, positive electricity, but they also need negative ground to work to complete the circuit. And if the ground's weak, they will flicker. So it could be as simple as weak ground wires. That's the black wire coming off. And you could check those with the meter or just look at them. You might find where they bolt to the frame. It's all rusted. You can just take it off, sand it down shiny, bolt it back on, spray it with a little protector spray so it doesn't corrode anymore. Could just be a weak ground too. Scotty, what first car should I get? A Volvo S60 T5 or an Infiniti G35 Coupe? Both vehicles, when they get to really high mileage, are endless money pits. So it would depend on the mileage. If you could get them cheap enough, I would go, if you're talking used, I'd go with whatever one has the lowest mileage. And I wouldn't buy either if they had more than 120,000 miles. I personally wouldn't buy either myself. I mean, I'd buy a Toyota and a Honda long before those things, but if that's your choice. You too said, Scotty, my whole engine base shakes when I take off from first gear only. Could it be a worn out clutch? Car's 80,000 miles, it's 5 years old. If you have a standard transmission and it shakes a lot, yes, you could have a worn out clutch. When they're wear, it doesn't grab right and it makes it shake. But first gear is the gear that you take off in. So if you have any problem, like a motor mount or transmission mount that's starting to go bad, get a jack piece of wood, put it under the engine, jack it up. If you jack it up and you watch while you're jacking and you see the engine and transmission start to lift up, but the body doesn't follow right away, then look and you'll see your motor mounts are cracked and broken. You need to replace motor mounts or transmission mounts. But if they're okay, yeah, you probably need a new clutch then. And it doesn't matter about the mileage and the year. It just depends on how you drive. If you're hard on a clutch, I've seen people wear them out in 15,000 miles if they really bang them hard and burn out all the time. Sense One says, Scotty, what can I use to prevent the ground points from rusting again after I clean them? Oh, it's simple. Clean them all up, sand them down, polish them up. Then bolt them on as tight as you can. Then go to any auto parts store and get battery terminal protector spray. It's made to keep acid from eating up battery terminals. Well, it's certainly going to keep rust from rusting up that too. It seals it nice. And it doesn't mess around with, the connection because it's made for battery terminals anyway. It's not cheap. It's like maybe $12-15 for a bottle, but it'll last you a lifetime. And you can use it on your battery terminals too. Samuel Hernandez says, what do you think of a 2018 Chrysler 300 V6? Well, they're very fast cars. They zip around, but they're Chryslers. So they're planned obsolescent money pits as they age. Now, you're talking about one that's 3 years old, right? If you can get one cheap enough, they have low resale value. You want a nice looking car and it's low mileage, it might last quite some time. But generally, people owe so much money and they think they're worth money, they're going to charge too much. A car like that, I wouldn't pay more than maybe $8,000-$10,000 tops. If you could get it even cheaper than that, yeah, you want a toy, go ahead. Don't pay top dollar for it because they're pieces of junk as they age and they fall apart. One of my son's fathers had one and he loved it until it had 80,000-90,000, fell apart, and he said, it's the worst car I ever buy. I'll never buy another Chrysler. Sikoskiwiak says, my 250,000 mile 06 HHR smells of coolant when I drive it. It's gotten worse. Any thoughts? Okay. Well, you're lucky you got 250,000 miles on an HHR. Those were junk wagons. Anything that leaks is going to smell of coolant. Those are notorious for blowing head gaskets. But if you watch my video, how to fix an overheating car engine, Scotty, you can see every possible thing to test. First thing I'd say, just buy a radiator cap. They cost $10. If it's leaking, it'll smell of coolant, right? And if it's not that, then you want to pressure test it for leaks, do all kinds of different tests. Maybe it's just a radiator cap or a loose cap or a hose with a hole in it. But no one knows. It could easily be the head gasket starting to blow. And if that's the case, you don't want to put that kind of money on it. But with all that mileage, and if it's only leaking coolant, it runs okay, Radiator stop is pretty good for that because that just means the coolant is leaking on the head gasket. If the oil leaks on the head gasket and the oil gets into the water, no sealer hardly ever fixes that. But if you're just getting coolant you smell, it's leaking out, the sealer will often work on that. I've had good luck with that over the years. Mark Mont says, can you make a tutorial video on how to drive a stick shift? I already have. Months ago, I had a brand new touring edition of the Mazda Miata. Beautiful car, fun to drive. And I showed people how to drive. Just go to my Scotty Kilmer channel, you know, type in Mazda Miata, learn how to drive a stick shift, it'll pop up, watch the whole video. Shows you exactly how to do it. And if you already have a license, know how to drive, it's going to take you maybe half a day to learn how to do that. It's not hard to do. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.